Joining me now are two people who watched this all happen live at the courthouse. MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice, Harry Lemon. It's great to have you guys both here. Well, let's just start in the morning, which is we didn't know that Stephanie Clifford, Stormy Daniels, was going to take the stand today, right?
We did not. I was standing in line waiting to get into the courtroom when the Associated Press reported this morning that Stormy Daniels would be the witness. And I have to tell you, I was really surprised for a couple of reasons. One, I was surprised that it hadn't gotten out before, but I was also surprised given where we were in the case. We heard perhaps the driest day of testimony in the trial so far yesterday, all about the false documents or the allegedly false business records that constitute the heart of the crime that's been charged here. To then go from that and instead of moving forward with other witnesses who would testify about those false business records, to go sort of backward in time, but also upward in interest to Stormy Daniels was, I think, a little bit of a surprise narratively for me.
Well, you know, we didn't know in the morning, but actually before the jury came in, the defense raised something about her testimony. So we knew it was going to be she before the jury did. So we could watch them there was a definite frisson, you know, when it happened. Whoa. And you could really zone in on the jury and their keen interest. This was a name they'd been waiting to hear.
Yes, and obviously the most famous other person, I think, involved in this encounter. So, all right, so you've got direct examination. Now, before we get into it, let me hear from you, each of you, how you view what is important about, if you're setting up this on direct, like what do you need if you're the prosecution out of this witness, Lisa?
Well, I'll tell you what the prosecution said, because it was largely what I anticipated that they would say, which is you need Stormy Daniels in the case because you need her to elaborate on what she would have told the public had she, in October of 2016, not signed any agreement at all, but instead come forward. You need the jury to believe that so that they can understand better what Trump's motivation was for entering into the conspiracy in the first place and authorizing Michael Cohen, according to the prosecutor, to enter into the hush money settlement.
You need to see her.
That's the other thing, right?
She's legally tangential, but she's narratively at the heart. The jury is curious. She's the human figure that puts everything in motion. The jury will be dissatisfied if it doesn't get a glimpse of her and hear her story.
Now, when I saw that she was going to be on, one of the challenges for a witness like this, the way that human beings work is that when we tell the same story over and over again, we don't tell it the same way every time. This is just how people are. It's how memory functions. And one of the things that happens in other litigation or criminal trials is when you have someone, you want them to, like, they do their deposition, then you don't want them talking a lot about it because then they're up there and you can say, well, you said this here and this here, right? So you've got this person in her that she's talked about this quite a bit. We played her on Jimmy Kimmel. She's in a Peacock. You know, she wrote a book. Like, so what was your expectation of what kind of witness she would be, and how was she?
Well, so let's start with the premise that the problem you identified is a problem for virtually every witness across this trial, and it's something that the prosecutors talked to prospective jurors about during voir dire. They basically said to them, people's memories fluctuate. The events at hand here happened a long time ago, and you won't blame people if there are minor inconsistencies in their stories because you'll understand that's human nature, right? And so they're prepared for that. But what makes Stormy Daniels even more different than that is that she's got a story here that's rooted in a sexual trauma. Yes, she said today, Trump never physically or verbally threatened her, but it's clear in her retelling of the story that it is a problematic sexual encounter from her perspective. And like many sexual trauma victims, for her, some of the details that are most memorable and vivid aren't necessarily the ones that are cognizable or even important or relevant for a court of law. And so confining her story to what the court thinks is important and what the defense will tolerate her testifying to is an added challenge on top of those inconsistencies built from the fact that these events happened. You know, the 2006 sexual encounter between them was 18 years ago.
Yeah,
that's true as to the sexual act itself, because Merchan was very concerned that it could be prejudicial to Trump.
So there's some sort of guardrails here about what she can and can't say.
That's right, and she speaks quickly, and the DA doesn't control her that much, and Merchan, like I've never seen him all during the trial, is piqued and actually at one point makes his own objection and sustains it. He thinks they go too far. But that's at this core narrative of the sex itself. More broadly, she tells a story, a sort of version of an American success story that's at once hard scrabble, but exotic, for lack of a better word. She really comes. She humanizes herself to the jury, which they're going to need because all they know is that she's a adult film actress, and she tells something that to really kind of try to
dimensionalize herself as an actual human being with hopes, dreams, a career, different things she's done.
Precisely, and yet. It's an unusual, does the jury get next to it? Because it's also, there's a sensational kind of exotic aspect to it, right?
That thing that you said, I think actually is really relevant too in terms of this question about motivation. Because I was following along today, and a number of people noted, and I think this actually comes up on Cross, that it has a darker cast. Her telling of the story is less sort of like buffoonishly like wah-wah kind of, and more like, ugh, this is gross. This is icky. And she's very clear. This was not sexual assault. This was consent in a legal sense. But in terms of her subjective experience of it, she's in a power position. It felt she kind of got badgered into it.
There's
basically
an imbalance of power, and she testified to looking up at the ceiling at one point and thinking to herself,
during the actual sexual encounter.
How did I misread this situation? How did I get to here? And I have to tell you, Chris, for me, where that called me back to is May of 2023, sitting in a federal courthouse not that far away, thinking about an E. Jean Carroll who was a victim of a sexual assault, thinking to herself after bantering with Trump, thinking she was going to have a cocktail party story in that Bergdorf Goodman lingerie floor, and walking out after the assault, shaken, thinking, what did I screwed up? What did I do to let it go here?
So her memory was murky, and she was sort of disassociated at that in the key event.
Here was my light bulb moment about this testimony today from afar, was putting two and two together, which is to say, it's the Access Hollywood tape is the biggest crisis the Trump campaign faces. Many people calling for him to leave. Subsequent accusations on the record by actual women who say he sexually assaulted me, he groped me. This story told in the way she told it today is it seems like much more of a possible death blow than the version that I think had been maybe communicated before, or how I understand it, which was like more, buffoonish hijinks and less predatory. And the reason that seemed to matter to me is because of the motive here, which is that this is about the campaign.
Right. And, to put it even a finer point on it, when you're talking about literally the campaign on a day-by-day basis, Stormy Daniels signs the first iteration of this non-disclosure agreement that is not paid for by the Trump people on the same day that the New York Times reports that these other women are coming out of the woodwork to say that they have been sexually assaulted by Trump. This is all happening in a succession of day by day by day, starting with October 7th and the Washington Post reporting the Access Hollywood tape. November 10th is the day that the New York Times reports these other women and Stormy Daniels signs for the first time. But she doesn't sign the real agreement, the one that gets funded, until October 28th. And meanwhile, the Trump campaign is fighting valiantly to get out from under the Access Hollywood tape and the weight of it, including all of these prominent Republicans who don't want to associate themselves with him anymore. Had she told this story, this would have been devastating. What Hope Hicks called a crisis would have been catastrophe.
But, until then, what we've had is all this sort of maneuvering, hush money. This was Trump the grotesque. This was Trump the foul, kind of monstrous figure. That is exactly what they were scared of in October of 2016.
Hence also the move for the mistrial. I want to talk about that.